Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Patchtown Pieces. Last episode we were talking about the history of Hecla, PA, and we moved just a bit up the road to Pleasant Unity. This intersection here is the centerpiece of the original portion of the town. The town actually has its roots way before the coal mining days. It goes back to 1789, and the earliest zip code is registered here in 1825. Here's a good aerial overview, shamelessly ripped from Google Maps, and I've broken down Pleasant Unity into 3 sections. You'll see the red, that's the original historic portion from 1789, and then you have in the yellow the Patchtown, which we'll get to shortly, the reason we're making this video, and then that blue is more modern housing developments. And as you can clearly see, still a major thoroughway here in the middle of western Pennsylvania. Head on that road south, you'll eventually end up in Mount Pleasant. Head up this road, you'll go through another patch community we'll talk about later on, Marguerite, and eventually off to Greensburg. I want to start talking about the history at the epicenter of town, but it is a very, very busy intersection. So we're going to move a little bit farther away, and actually we're overlooking this open farm field. Get you an idea of what most of Point Pleasant Unity's life was like prior to the mining days. Agricultural base, with a large employer being the Union Woolen Mill, dating back to 1817. Pleasant Unity was relatively peaceful and quiet until 1917. That was the year that a lot changed in this town in multiple ways. If you look over to my corner over here, this whole segment was actually torched in December of 1917 during a terrible fire. What caused it was in the back of one of the stores on this block, something must have returned and caught fire. It was in the early morning hours. Very quickly, the fire spread to either buildings next to them, and it has spread through the whole block here along Church Street. It eventually ran the whole way up, back down to Main Street, where it caught fire on the Barnhart store, which is now an empty lot. It's a big 3-story structure, burned that to the ground. Also took the Oddfellows hallway, which in the my apologies. And then it took a warehouse as well away, which in the warehouse was where the newly formed Red Cross unit for Pleasant Unity had been set up, and a lot of their rescue equipment was destroyed in that fire. About a dozen families were displaced. This whole block would have been nothing but ashes around Christmas time in 1917. Reading from the newspaper, when the fire reached the Barnard store, which again was approximately located in this empty lot, the eyewitnesses could hear popping noises inside, and that was from the cans on the shelves popping from the intense heat. And then the fire eventually reached into a stash of bullets, which started cooking off and actually strayed a gentleman in the head. Was not seriously harmed, thankfully. This fire, as I said, took out over a dozen structures, left over 12 families homeless. And this was all before Christmas, so worst time any of this could have happened. Thankfully, the only, if you want to call serious injury, was somebody running across Main Street, running with a bucket of water, ended up getting hit by a car. And I mentioned that the Order of the Oddfellows Hall was burned in a 1917 fire. Well, I just discovered that this big brick structure was the replacement building, put up here in 1919. Looks like in more recent times, the Oddfellows Hall has been converted into an apartment complex, but at the moment, I think it is just abandoned. Very big, cool old building. Wonder what somebody can do with it. Although the town had just suffered this terrible fire in the winter of 1917, the Presbyterian school here actually raised a small donation of $25 to the Armenian Syrian Relief Fund. Looking on the 1876 map, I can count, I believe, about 4 churches that were in town. But as of today, the only one that is currently standing is the United Methodist Church. Right across the street here would have been a German Reformed church. We got actually 3 different dates on the United Methodist Church. Initially erected in 1870, rededicated in 1906. And then if we go down to this new pathway established, we got an even newer date. Remodeled in 1988, and the cornerstone is the memory of Dr. S.S. Wright. take a look here at the Old Church Bell and Eagle Bell Company, Lebanon, Pennsylvania. So this is a Pennsylvania-made bell. And the date has unfortunately corroded away partially. We got July 23rd, something, either it's 18 or 1967. Two of the older structures in town remain. I'm unsure of how old this brick building goes back to. It was a storefront at one point, and across the street is what was once called the Jordan Hotel, and you could definitely tell it's one of the older structures. Just look at the roofing, the old style roofing there. This is currently now known as the Pleasant Corner Inn, and as been some modifications done. As you can see, this bar window was installed. And there's also a wooden addition on the back. I'm not sure if it's the same hotel, but there is reports that in 1922 a raid occurred here during the Prohibition era on one of the hotels in town. It's not listed Jordan Hotel, but if I had to guess, it was probably this one. A gentleman apparently had sold a half a quart of whiskey under the table, and they came in, busted down the walls, and found several panels that you can remove that had hiding spaces for whiskey. Change also came to Pleasant Unity in 1917 when the Jameson Coal and Coke Company established their number 20 shaft right here. If you keep heading up this road a couple miles, you'll end up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, just to put you in perspective. This would have been the former location of the number 20 shaft. Now there are a couple surviving structures, and right over here, in fact, is one of them. It's Dancer's Auto Repair, but back in the 1920s, this would have been the office for the number 20 mine, and somewhere right about here would have been the shaft, the actual shaft going down into the mine. And then going across a little valley over here, it's kind of hard to see for the chain wheel. Let's try and get a little closer. Come on, focus, there we go. Going across the little valley here would have been the tipple, and the Pennsylvania Railroad branch, the Unity branch, the PRR, ran right down to this little valley, and the old gob pile would have been on the opposite hillside. Two additional structures survive. This long brick building is the motor barn. That's where the electric locomotives would have been housed. And then the gray building was the machine shop. And there's also an old scoop there from the mining days. The patch was established east of town along Route 981 at the intersection with Phillips Road. Initially, it's listed as containing a row of about 20 single dwellings, but it's apparent with structures on either side of the roadway, the patch had expanded as more miners came here to work. Jameson number 20 started off employing 130 employees and produced over 140,000 tons of coal in 1919. Although the coal industry suffered from a slump in the early 1920s, number 20 prevailed and became one of Jameson's leading mines. Throughout the Great Depression, it averaged anywhere from 400,000 to 500,000 tons annually. At the outbreak of the Second World War, it employed about 300 individuals. Now, this is not like older mining operations in Westmoreland County. Jameson number 20 had no coke ovens. The coal was shipped directly to the steel mills. And we are now looking at the Jameson 20 Company store. When I asked the history community on Facebook for any input on Jameson number 20, I found a lot of people referred to different parts of it by different nicknames. There was a segment called Gypsy Row. There was a segment called Hunky Hill. I cannot pinpoint which part of the neighborhood were these names, however. Throughout 1947, Jameson began selling off their patch communities in the area. Number 20 was sold in July, with present occupants getting first dibs on the sales. There were about 50 structures sold off that summer. The mine remained in operation, lasting longer than most in the region. I can't pinpoint an exact date, but the operation seemed to have fizzled out by the early 1960s. One of the coolest buildings here in town is the original bank. It still stands. Obviously, nobody's in it at the moment. Bit of an interesting history in here. In December of 1932, the bank actually got robbed for about $4,500. The three perpetrators were eventually caught out in Ohio, And it turns out, at least according to the paper I was reading, these perpetrators had robbed about 50 different places in the Pleasant Unity area. This is their big final bust. Right off the main drag in 1927, Pleasant Unity got its own school building. This was the grade school. Grades 1 through 8 went through here. In preparation for making this episode, I seeked out some information via Facebook pages like Western Pennsylvania Memories, and most people seem to have memories recalling their time in this grade school. Particularly a story that came up was of a Mr. Fowler, who seems to be pretty well liked amongst the students. He was memorable most for, however, due to the fact that his right hand had been cut in an accident. He was throwing wood chips very quickly into a chipper, and he wasn't paying attention apparently, and had a cut from his thumb all the way down to his wrist. And during his days as a teacher here from the 1940s through the 60s, he was best known for his black glove he had to wear. And as always in these videos, I always try to make sure the town has an honor roll to tell the brief stories of some of the local residents that paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. So basically what I do is when I go through do these research, I don't read through every single name. I unfortunately do not have time for that, and I do not mean that as any disrespect. So usually I pick out a few names at random and see where they lead, and so I usually end up with pretty interesting stories. Let's start off here with David Bates. He was a serviceman over in the Aleutian Islands campaign, a very forgotten part of World War II, where the Americans fought the Japanese on the Aleutian Islands off of the coast of Alaska. David Bates died June 15th, 1943 during the Battle of Attu Island. And exactly a year later, June 15th, 1944 in France, Harry Castille passed away. At the time of his death, Harry was a veteran of combat. He had fought both in Africa and in Sicily. Now, when I did the research for the few names I was using for this video, I all found that they're not actually from Pleasant Unity. They're more from the general central Westmoreland County area, which is expected with some of these. I found some names on the Hecla honor roll that were not from Hecla, were more from Mount Pleasant, but they had family in the area. So Frank Quatsi, that's what Google Translate told me. Yes, Google Translate. Very high-tech source I'm using for translations. Frank Quatsi was the son of Italian immigrants. He was from a pretty large family. Let the truck go by, let the truck go by. Let the truck go by, let the truck go by. He ended up serving in the 7th Cavalry. He became a corporal in the 7th Cavalry. He served in the Admiralty Island campaigns in Papua New Guinea, and ended up dying tragically March 23rd, 1944 from wounds in battle. Fun little tidbit, Frank's brother was a guy by the name of Jesse Anthony Quatsi, who was an outside tackle for the Green Bay Packers in 1933, then for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1934, and then eventually played for the New York Jets in 1935. Came back to Pittsburgh and coached the Pittsburgh Americans in the AFL for several years before moving out to California. Just before I was going home, I was driving this back lane just to see if there was any cool little structures to take a couple photos of. And I found here, the Volunteer Fire Company, they have a memorial as well for the members of the fire department. And on the horizon, you will see a horse looking at me, very confused, probably as most people in town are currently, wondering why somebody's out here in the middle of the cold filming about an obscure patch town. If you find yourself passing through Pleasant Unity, be sure to stop, take a look at the honor roll, take a look at some of the old buildings like the bank and the school and the church. Make sure to take a quick pass by the site of the Jameson 20 mine. And also, don't forget to stop and get a slice of pizza from Pleasant Unity. This was the first time I got to try this place, even though I'm from the area, been here all my life. Never tried Pleasant Unity pizza. Must admit, bit on the sweet side, but there's nothing wrong with that. Still enjoyed the pizza. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in the next episode of Patchtown Pieces.